Kia ora e te whānau. Is that working? Have I got it right? It says on. Oh, that's working. I can hear myself. Kia ora. Ko mawere karatai tōku e kua. I have the great honour of saying our opening karakia today. I'm going to say it in te reo and then I'm going to say it in English so that you know what we have agreed to today. Kia karakia tātou. Kia horo te māreno, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana. Hei huarahi mā tātou i te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou, kia tātou katoa. May peace be widespread. May the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day. Let us show respect for each other. Bind us together. Haumie, hui, tai kie. Kia ora.
Ina mana ina reo e rorangatirama. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Helen Nicholson toku wingua, te tumu whakarai tupua te wharewananga o tākou. Nō reira tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, my name's Helen Nicholson and I'm the Acting Vice-Chancellor, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the University to this inaugural professorial lecture to mark the promotion of Sara Walton to Professor. And a big thank you to Morewa for the karakia at the beginning. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Sara's family, friends and colleagues who are with us in person and online. And I'd like to give a special welcome to Sara's husband Peter and their children Ben and Matt, who are with us in the lecture theatre tonight. And Sara's mum, who's probably got up very early, who's watching online from England. Inaugural professorial lectures are a real treat for us. They give us an opportunity to learn a little bit about our talented academics and to showcase the excellence research that occurs across the university. And as I've said before, promotion to Professor at Otago is not easily achieved and requires an academic to show outstanding competence in leadership, in teaching, research and service. And Sara has demonstrated all of these. Sara is definitely a true Otago person, having received 6 qualifications from the university. She's an accomplished teacher, and as we will shortly hear, her research focuses on sustainability, climate change and business. She is part of networks and collaborations within Aotearoa, the Pacific and internationally. And a particular strength of her research is its applied nature, and equally important is that Sara actively communicates her work, not just in academic journals, but to the wider community, and not least in the ODT. So congratulations, Sara, on your deserved promotion. I'm very much looking forward to your lecture, and I'd now like to invite Professor Marie Tyne, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the Division of Commerce, to provide a formal welcome to an introduction to Professor Walton. Nō reira, tēnā koutou.
So, Professor Nicholson, tēnā koe. Professor Campbell, tēnā koe. Dr. Kalitai, tēnā koe. And Professor Walton, tēnā koe. Peter, Ben, Matt, and Sara's mum, Christine, who is joining us live on Zoom from the UK, tēnā koutou. Extended whānau, friends and colleagues, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, ko Marie Tyne toku ingoa. I have the privilege of being the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the Division of Commerce, the division which houses the management department where Sara is based. And it is my absolute pleasure to warmly welcome you all here today to Professor Walton's Professorial Lecture. Sara Walton was promoted to Professor in September 2023, and tonight we come together to celebrate this auspicious achievement. Professor Walton grew up in Invercargill and attended the University of Otago, where she completed a BA, come on in, welcome, where she completed a BA majoring in anthropology and a BCom majoring in management. And as our Vice-Chancellor has pointed out, 2 degrees were not enough. And so Sara went on to do a postgraduate diploma in tourism, which I remember fondly, having been a classmate with Sara, which she was, of course, awarded distinction, a postgrad certificate in tertiary teaching, and an MCom, where she was also awarded with distinction. Sara then completed her PhD in 2008, which was entitled Contesting Natures, a discourse analysis of natural resource conflicts. This research explored the discursive formations involved in 2 environmental conflicts, during which organisations were not permitted to carry out their proposed extractive activities in native logging and the extension of a gold mine. Sara utilised a discursive analysis to review stakeholder debate and concerns within these 2 different conflicts, concluding the value and importance of greening and the need for organisations and natural environment literature to recognise the possibility of multiple meanings of nature. Greening, the environment, and sustainability have of course remained at the forefront of Sara's research over the years. While completing her PhD, Sara was employed as a lecturer in the Department of Management, moving to a senior lecturer in 2009 and then an associate professor in 2019 before becoming full professor last year. As already stated, a promotion to full professor at the University of Otago is not a step taken lightly. You must excel in all 3 areas of the role: teaching, research, and service. Professor Walton has certainly achieved this over her career as an academic. As a leader in research on carbon footprints, industry readiness for climate change, innovation for environmental sustainability, sustainable and low carbon transitions, and analysing and understanding environmental conflicts and concerns, Professor Walton has published widely in academic literature, as well as featuring regularly in the ODT with her column on sustainable business. Professor Walton is passionate about the real-life application of research, having run or been a team member in an impressive number of externally funded interdisciplinary projects for many years, which have made impactful differences to business practice. Examples of her work include the Energy Cultures Program, Energy Transitions in Vanuatu, Land Use and Common Grounds at Macrae's Gold Mine, and work with brands on a Get Ready for Climate Change project with construction companies. I'm sure Sara will also inform us today of her current projects, which include leading an Endeavour project on circular economy, project work with XRB on the effectiveness of climate risk disclosure, and her collaboration with Stuff New Zealand in producing the Climate Action Report Card. What is clearly striking about Sara's research is its impact, the impact upon consumers, businesses, and society as a whole. Sara regularly appears in local and national media and engages with organisations such as Rotary New Zealand to disseminate and discuss her research. Professor Walton not only exceeds at research, but is an experienced and outstanding teacher. Having taught across all levels, including MBA and executive education, Professor Walton's teaching is extremely well received by students. She is an excellent communicator and innovator of teaching material, having received excellent feedback and teaching accolades across and throughout her teaching career. Professor Walton leads course design and development and was instrumental in developing and establishing the Master of Sustainable Business, both on campus and distance, a program which has gone from strength to strength over the last 8 years. She also developed the minor in Sustainable Business, another sought-after course for the Otago Business School. Professor Walton has an impressive supervision profile, and I know is a passionate supervisor of many PhD and DBA students, as well as Master of Commerce, Master of Sustainable Business, Master of Business, and MBA students. Professor Walton's service commitments have been wide-reaching across the Management Department, the Division of Commerce, and the University. Professor Walton has been Associate Dean Research and the Deputy Dean for the Otago Business School since February 2023, in which time she has led the development of the Division's future strategy, as well as embedding the Division's research strategy. Sara plays an instrumental role in the senior leadership team for the Division and actively collaborates with HODs and Associate Deans across the Division. Professor Walton has undertaken various additional service roles over the years across the Division and within her department, including Acting HOD in 2022, Chair of her Department Postgraduate and Research Committee, and a member of the Business School's Research Committee. She is a current and active member of the University Research Committee and the University's Equity Advisory Committee. Professor Walton is not only an active and excellent citizen across the university, but she also contributes to the wider community, providing advice and service to many boards, organisations and businesses across the Motu. That is just a snippet of the career of Professor Walton so far, and I know we are going to learn a lot more this evening from the Professor herself. I have been extremely fortunate to work with Sara for a number of years. Sara's commitment to people first is evident in everything she does. She has been instrumental in driving our divisional strategy and, importantly, ensuring that people feel included in its development. Sara demands us to be accountable for our actions, or the actions we don't take. And this is clear in her internationally recognised culture change research agenda. However, Sara also demands that people are listened to, that they are involved in decisions, and that the impact people can make in decisions are recognised. I thoroughly enjoy working with Sara. I feel very fortunate to have her by my side. I admire her values and her work ethic and thank her for her support and her guidance. Many of you know already that Sara has not only been working hard over the past few weeks or months on this IPL, as well as all the various day-to-day tasks she continues to manage, but she has been training for the Routeburn Classic, which is an adventure run over the Routeburn track. I'm not sure how an adventure run and Routeburn track can actually be used together. Slog, climb, grunt, but run 32 kilometres of hard grind, I would say. And it's happening this Saturday, Sara. So let's get Sara up here so she can complete her IPL and get back to her training. I'm absolutely delighted and privileged to be able to warmly welcome Professor Sara Walton to give her inaugural professorial lecture. Ngā mihi nui.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko ina rangi te whakapapa rangi mai. Engari, ko waihopai whenua tupu. Ko Otapoti kaika, ko Sara tākou I koa. Tēnā tātou katoa. Sorry, that was supposed to be up at the same time. I've got to remember to do that. Someone's not doing it for me. Thank you all for being here today. This is obviously quite overwhelming and nerve-wracking, and I haven't been sure all week which is going to be more nerve-wracking, this or the challenge in the weekend. Right now it feels like this, but when I finish, I'm sure it'll be the weekend. Thank you to Dr. Karatai, Professor Nicholson, and Professor Tyne for your introductions, and Professor Campbell for your thank you at the end, no doubt. I'm actually starting where people normally finish these lectures. So normally we finish with acknowledgements, but I really wanted to start because I don't stand here as doing all this work by myself. I stand here because I've had lots of people who have been helping support and work with me over the years. And some of these are pictured here, and some of the people I'll also be talking about during the talk today. So I just wanted to start with a bit of a shout out to the many people that I've worked with. Plus, I just wanted to acknowledge my brother, David, and his wife, Catherine, online. Hello. This is where I'm not going to get emotional. Hello, Lachlan, James, and Patrick. Hello to my Cake Club members. It's the best club to have Cake Club. And my book club friends as well. Also to my friends Carly and Michelle, my dear friends from my university days, who are also online. Thank you for coming, my Southern Youth Development team. It's lovely to see you here. And also to Jimmy and Ruben. I hope this goes okay. And finally, obviously, a special shout out to my family, my mum online with Rufus. Hi, Mum. And my dad, who passed away 3 years ago. Plus also to my sons, Ben and Matt, and my husband, Peter, who think that I love my phone and my job more than them, but clearly I don't. Now, another reason for putting this up at the start is that you all now know who they are, which means that they can't leave, and they're going to be lectured to for 40 minutes by their mum. So that was my main, no, not really, my main motivation. Anyway, there's lots of people here, and as I said, I'll be talking about them throughout. Okay, one of the earliest public environmental conflicts in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and one of our most famous ones was the Save Manapōuri campaign around building the electric hydro dam on the lake. Now, the initial proposal was to raise the lake levels by 10 metres. 264,907 people signed a petition against raising the lake by 10 metres. At that point, back in the day, New Zealand had 2.8 million people, and there were about 1 million people in the South Island. So it was a pretty significant petition that went to Parliament. The final decision revisited the original plans and only raised the lake by 2 metres. So that was the result of these protests and the petition. In 1973, the Guardians of the Lake was established to monitor lake and river levels associated with the dam. And 1973 was also monumental for me because I arrived in Aotearoa, New Zealand from England. This is me on the way, and this is me with my family in Invercargill. They came all the way from England to Invercargill with our dog Chimo. Dogs are always part of our whānau really, and so quite appropriate for me to have Chimo there too. So that was considered a bit of an adventure. We came out in a boat all the way from the UK, and I'm very happy that we did. As most of you know, I'm a very proud Kiwi. Okay, but back to conflicts. And as Marie has already alluded to, my PhD was around environmental conflicts, and this was me in graduation day. Another reason you can't leave the lecture, Ben. And I was really interested in these because it seemed that the environment had won in these particular conflicts. And so what I wanted to do was to actually explore those reasons behind. So this was actually my research question. I used a discourse theory analysis to understand what were the conditions of possibility that enabled these sustainable beach proposals and the proposal to extend the Globe Hill mine in Reefton to be turned down. And what I ended up looking at were two sort of dominant discourses that were happening at the time. The first came from a lot more of the local community and some of the foresters, was around this notion of being able to manage nature. Okay, and this is part of the sustainable logging scheme. The second one, which got termed, well, I guess part of the greenie, was more around protecting nature. And this discourse was quite clever in the way in which it operated, and particularly in the way in which it managed to negate the local or managing nature discourse to disestablish that position from being seen as credible. So, for example, our Prime Minister at the time, Helen Clark, was on TV and called the West Coasters feral. So it meant that it started to negate their position of being able to actually say something legitimate around this notion around sustainable logging. So I looked at the way these discourses interacted and how they actually were able to create a certain way of defining and talking about nature that actually became the dominant way that we wanted to think about it. So since then, the method that I've developed from that, I also used in a more recent study with McRae's mine in Oceana Gold. So not far up the road, about an hour up the road. And this was with Dr. Jeff Foote, who's somewhere I think in the audience. And we spent a day sort of talking with McRae's, and we interviewed lots of stakeholders and partners around the mine, and looked at their views of land use. And similarly, we found kind of similar aspects coming through to the earlier study around this notion of conservation and preservation. And this is taken from the McRae's Mine website that talked a little bit about how that study has started to influence the way in which they interact with their stakeholders. Okay, but how did I get here? How did I get to be interested in the environment and be studying and get to my PhD? So as Marie has mentioned, I came to university from Invercargill. I was the first in my family to come to university. I studied a BA in anthropology and a BCom in management. And then I decided that I'd quite like to sort of change that and do a postgraduate diploma in tourism. And my dissertation was on perceptions of crowding on the Kepler track. At the time, I worked for what was Fiordland Travel, I think it's now Real NZ, in Milford Sound. And every day off, I spent handing out surveys on the Kepler track to understand perceptions of crowding. The reason why I did that research was because I went in and knocked on the door of DOC and said, I'm keen to do some research on the Kepler track. What do you need to know? And they said, well, we're really worried about crowding. So can you go and find out what's happening with crowding? Interestingly enough, when I came back to uni, a few pages had been ripped out of that dissertation in the library, and so the library was super stoked that I was back to able to get their copy of my dissertation back in one piece again. But then I did find out, also from Anna Carr, who's not here today, but she was telling me that she constantly still cites this work, which is kind of mind-blowing really, that you do a small study handing out surveys, but yet the way in which it's thought about crowding, and particularly around the huts as opposed to being on the tracks, actually started to change the way DOC was doing things. So that was quite interesting. Then I had a few gap years. And I have put that one up there for you to laugh, because we went to Edinburgh. So Peter and I met at the Christchurch Park Royal, and where we both worked, and then we headed overseas, and that mainly spending time in Edinburgh and the Shetland Islands, as well as travelling around. When I came back from these gap years, I really wanted to study again. I'd really enjoyed studying, and as those who know me, I actually wasn't very good at working in businesses, because once I figured out how they operated, I then got a little bit bored and wanted to go on and do something else. So Peter tells me I'm never allowed to leave this job, because it means that I can go and study different businesses at different times. So I looked around at the time and what was available, and advertised in the paper was a teaching assistant in the management department at the University of Otago. So that was actually what brought me back. That position involved 20 hours teaching, and 20 hours on my master's, and I decided to explore the notion of career in a changing world of work. When I finished that, I was offered a lecturing position with one of the conditions to be enrolled in a PhD. And I had thought that I would continue studying career and perhaps take a more critical perspective on career, but no, two things happened to change my mind. One was a study with Shane Grice and Bevan Catley, now no longer at Otago, and it was about the controversy surrounding the announcement by DB to close the Monteith Brewery on the West Coast. There was quite a significant public outcry and a public boycott of Monteith at the time. And we thought that was quite interesting, how a company made a decision in an Auckland office, and literally they did because we spoke to them, about a number of different livelihoods on the West Coast with thinking that there would be no repercussions of that decision. But obviously they hadn't spent any time on the West Coast, because we would know that there would be some pretty big repercussions making a decision like that. So we were really interested in how that kind of happened, and we developed teaching cases and articles from understanding that. We even had the two leaders of the boycott come and talk to the class, one of whom was the infamous photographer Peter Bush. So we spent a fantastic night talking to him. He's quite a well-known photographer of rugby. So that was one thing. The second thing was Diane Rufew. Good to Diane, she's online. And I developed a 400-level paper called Organisations and the Natural Environment. And I decided to have a guest lecture from Professor Marcus Milne. Now, if any of you remember Marcus Milne, and some of you here will, Marcus didn't suffer fools lightly. So I was going to meet with Marcus, and I was like, okay, I've really got to know what I'm talking about when I go and meet him. So I've got to read his papers and then read up what this topic means, so when I go in I don't look like an idiot. And what I found was that I actually really enjoyed it. I obviously enjoyed his work and enjoyed this notion of sustainability reporting and what companies were doing and looking at how they were talking about what they were doing. So this led to quite a bit of work with Kate Cairns, who's now at AUT, and Helen Tregeter, who's now at Royal Holloway in London as well. So we spent quite a bit of time analysing some of the early reporters in Aotearoa, and at that stage things weren't tremendously great, as this graph shows. We evaluated their reports on many different aspects, and you can see here that many were putting in the no disclosures. So many companies were not really talking that much about what it was that they were doing. We were also quite critical of them, as you can see by the comment I've just put there around the fact that there was a lot of things missing from the report. And in fact, indeed, sadly, I'd probably be quite critical around equity and social justice to this day about how they're dealt with by many of our organisations, particularly in the reporting. A couple of things that we also looked at, one was we looked at how they were talking about sustainability, and we talked about this notion of a journey. And that's in the paper Creating Adventures in Wonderland. Organisations were talking a lot about the journey of sustainability, but were really talking about what the destination was. So we didn't actually really know where they were going. So it's all very well to be on a journey, but if you have a journey without an endpoint, we don't really know what that is. So there's a lot of language being used to diffuse what organisations were actually doing. And so the other point there was that we also decided that organisations were translating sustainability for eco-efficiency. So these core concepts that we might think about as being related to sustainability were actually just talked about as how to do better with less in terms of eco-efficiency. So we were quite critical of organisations. So when I finished my PhD, I decided that I wanted to embark on an area that was a bit more positive in a way, and trying to look at what organisations were doing. And at that time, Jodie Ann Kirkwood, who was a colleague who'd not long finished her PhD in around entrepreneurs, and we thought it'd be interesting. There was this new sort of topic being talked about called ecopreneurs, to actually start to think about what this notion of an ecopreneur or an environmental entrepreneur was in Aotearoa. So we found, we did a number of different case studies, we did interviews, we did a nationwide survey, so we got together quite a bit of data, as you can see from this page here. So often our ecopreneurs had quite similar motivations to more general entrepreneurs, but we found that they had a lower level of financial motivation. They talked more about earning a living, talked more about lifestyle or providing for their family. But they had a really strong commitment to the environment. And in our survey, we wanted to test that commitment and ask them at what level of a financial cost would they change their environmental commitment. And most of them put they never would. So even we went through 1,000, 10,000, all that, they were like, no. The whole reason for their business was about being green, and getting rid of that was like going against their bottom line. So that was kind of quite interesting in some of those initial studies that we did quite some time ago now. I continued to look at environmental entrepreneurs in different contexts. One of the contexts I was lucky enough to be introduced to by Brendan Gray was a woman in business in Samoa. And this, I guess, has started a relationship with Samoa that I will continue this year as well through the National University of Samoa. We were lucky enough to spend some time in Samoa, and you can see there that fieldwork was done with the whole whānau. So that was pretty normal for us all to go and visit many different farms. So Women in Business runs over 300 organic farms across all of Samoa. They possibly could be called family in business rather than just women, because it's extended to be the sort of whānau unit. They do a variety of different things, and the pictures I have here around the tapa cloth and the fine mat weaving, as well as over here, these are actually cocoa beans. It's quite a delicacy to suck those cocoa beans, apparently. They're very nice. But what they are quite well known for is selling their virgin coconut oil to the body shop, and that was one of their really big contracts when I was there. So I spent a number of weeks trying to understand their business model and how they integrated their aspects of culture with sustainability, and I produced the model up the top there to look at them. Other contexts in which I'm looking at environmental entrepreneurship is in the circular economy, and this is one of the current projects that we have working at the moment. So a circular economy, as opposed to a more linear one that moves us through from taking resources to waste through the various different use phases, to a more circular one that keeps those resources in action. So it's not about creating waste, it's about eliminating waste. So through Mio Meo Aotearoa, which is an MB-funded project out of the University of Waikato, I've been looking at how to bring about systemic change to create a circular economy for the well-being of Aotearoa. Now, I use a really messy model to think about that systemic change, and this is it here. Okay, this is my theory slide. So this is called the multi-level perspective. And I'm really interested in looking at how our entrepreneurs actually can bring about systemic change, because that's what most of them actually want. When you talk to environmental and social entrepreneurs, they're change makers. They want to bring about change to the system. It's one of the key drivers as well of their organisation. It's why they're being green. It's why they're so passionate about it. Now, this diagram has 3 different levels. At the bottom, we have the niche, which is where we have all our innovations bubbling away. This is where I place our entrepreneurial actors in the system. They have different innovations that they're bringing to the system. The main part of our system is what's called the regime, which is that bit in the middle. And this is the way in which we have our policy, we have our culture, our market, industry, science, and that's our business as usual. And that's really slow to change. And it has to be slow to change, because we can't keep changing the way we operate society every 2 minutes. It would be a bit of anarchy, really. But we need it to change quite quickly at the moment, and I'll come to that as we go through it. And then at the top we have our big landscape, which is our big way that society likes to think. And we actually need to see those changes at all those levels to shift the way in which we do things. And so we've been using that to understand if we want to have circular economy for the wellbeing of Aotearoa, then we need to look at all of those different levels and how they're operating. My focus at the moment, and Mawera works on this with me as well, which we've been looking at, is down in that sort of those niche, and thinking about how it is that the niche interact across those different levels to bring about change. So a couple of examples of thinking about change, and one is from my work with SID, and they're looking at the diagram now, I can see them. And the other is here, an organisation that Mawera and I visited recently called Critical in Auckland. Critical are taking, and in the back of that picture you can see sort of a net. They're taking old fishing nets, breaking them down and producing the plastic, and you can see the bit of plastic that they've produced on there. When you go into BNZ, have a look at their new sort of tops, their bench tops and their countertops. They'll be a bright blue colour. They're from fishing nets as well, and they're from Critical Design. So they're managing to take this plastic, and it doesn't matter, they're not worried about it being mixed plastic, and breaking it down and producing new material from that. They're actually taking old vapes and breaking them down and producing another type of material from vapes, because we know that some of these disposable vapes aren't pretty good. So it was really impressive to have a look around that organisation. Again, these are our entrepreneurs bubbling away at the bottom. The other example I have here is from SID. What happens to our bikes when we throw them away? And these are really good questions. What happens to our goods when we throw them away? Well, a number of bikes end up in the Dunedin landfill every year. And one of the things that SID does is to take these bikes, and most of them, well, perhaps a number of them anyway, we want to be hopeful with most of them, we can actually fix up and then provide back to families for free. So to help people across Dunedin be able to have a bike. Some of them are taken apart and used for different parts. This is kind of taking that waste out of the system, but what we really need for a circular economy, and what we need when we're thinking about shifting the system, is actually to try and eliminate that waste at the start. We need our bicycle manufacturers to think, when they're designing a bike, how that will be taken apart at the end of its life. Not being taken at the landfill and being wonderfully looked after by SID. But no, SID is Southern Youth Development, formerly Malcolm, I forgot to mention that. But yeah, so we need to have that in the design phase. And that's why it's really important for us to take this systemic view and look at how that system is operating. And I'm very excited about the work that my PhD student Gavin will be doing to look at that ecosystem and understand that ecosystem for change. Okay, now that leads me to another branch of my study, wider studies, to start to understand how organisations bring about change. So in amongst taking the systems approach, I also wanted to look at that organisational level. In 2013, I joined the Energy Cultures team led by Professor Janet Stevenson, and I was working on the area of energy cultures in business. This is a really simple yet a really powerful framework to start to understand behaviour, our energy behaviour across individuals, across businesses, across countries and across regions. So we can start to break that down by looking at these three different elements. And what I say, it is really simple, but it's incredibly powerful when we start to look at the dynamics between these different aspects. So this framework over here talks about the energy practices, the things that people do, talks about the norms or the ways that people think, and the material culture, the things that people have. And if you think about that, those three things help to create your particular behaviour. So if you think about how you heat your house, depends on what it is that you have, your material culture. It depends on your energy practices. I teach this a bit with students. I've heard a lot about the free hour of power kind of things. And it depends on the way that you think. Do you expect to be warm in your house? So this can be used in lots of different ways. And my role, I've gone the wrong way. and the energy cultures was to try and look at this within businesses. So I started looking at SMEs and trying to understand, but at that stage, in about 2013 and 2014, SMEs weren't too worried about energy because the price wasn't much of a concern for them. So it was quite difficult to start engaging with them. So I turned and looked at a number of case studies that had already been produced and tried to look at the different ways in which they had talked about what it is that they'd done and developed energy cultures. So I looked at those different ways in which they'd started to develop capabilities for particular energy eco-innovations that they'd undertaken to develop what we might call strategic capabilities in the organisation. And I had these three different models here that came out of that work. An important finding from this work was that an understanding to create a strategic capability was that all three elements actually needed to be operating. So you needed to have the material culture, the practices and the norms operating in a dynamic system to align and create a competitive advantage. So if you were just going to change a technology in a workplace, that often didn't result in creating any strategic capabilities for competitive advantage because people carried on with the same practices and the same way of thinking. So really within an organisation, we needed to shift all three of those to see that change and to work towards more sustainability. So the Energy Cultures Framework was a very powerful way to start to look at how organisations were doing that within embedding aspects within their organisation. The Energy Cultures Framework has also enabled me to connect my research with teaching and real-world problems. Before the recent legislative changes to rental housing, some of the student flats in North Dunedin were notorious for their poor condition. At the time, the Sustainable Cities Group at the Wellington School of Medicine had developed a rental housing warrant of fitness. So I developed an assignment for my 300 level class that involved students doing a warrant of fitness on their flat, measuring temperatures with an eye button for around, we tried to have them for 2 to 3 weeks, and also analysing their own energy culture. This is, here depicts the energy cultures, the key things that we found from students, and probably most of that is not particularly surprising to you. Some of the minimum temperatures were a little surprising though, and some of the failures on the warrant of fitness were as well. This of course was quite topical, but I was also really conscious that it wasn't great advertising for the university. And a number of people told me that. And while I'm smiling in that picture, obviously the data's not much to smile about. The second article, The Students Not to Blame for Poor Flats, I actually wrote in the airport in a really bad mood. I read the ODT, lots of my stuff is done because I'll get annoyed. I read this ODT article where the OUSA guy had a spray bottle and said, students, if you've got mould, you just need to spray it and get rid of it. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And so I wrote, the students are not just to blame for their poor flats. And so you can see there, do not blame students for the mouldy state of their flats. This is a multi-stakeholder situation. So I literally went and sent it off, and it got published. And I actually got a bit of a reputation standing up to a few landlords as well at that point. On a more positive note, using the energy cultures, I was part of a team conducting a program evaluation of an Australian aid program, which was around shifting lighting in Vanuatu from kerosene to solar. This was funded by AusAid. So we spent 2 weeks in country, and Vanuatu has 84 islands, so we tried to travel to a few islands, but not all 84. And we conducted interviews and focus groups in villages across Vanuatu. The shift from kerosene to solar had been incredibly rapid in Vanuatu, and everywhere we went, people just wanted to buy more solar lamps. We did expect that could be because they were breaking, but actually they weren't. And the people in Vanuatu were also learning how to fix them themselves. So we found very little lamps in landfill, which we were pretty sort of impressed with. But we really wanted to understand why this transition had happened so quickly, so rapidly. And why? Because it was easy. So not a great answer really back to Australian aid, but it was really about the ease of use. So when we started to analyse that through the energy cultures framework, we could see that the material culture was really easy to use. You just put it outside and charge it up, and when you needed it, you pressed a button. Well, that had kerosene lights, like as you can see here, that you didn't just press a button to get your kerosene light to work. It made their everyday practices much easier. Things like getting up in the middle of the night to tend to children, you could just put on your solar light and off you went. Children could do their homework at night with a solar light. People could continue working in the evening as well, and doing other chores. If they're out in the gardens, they can use the solar lights to come back again. It also aligned much easier with some of their norms in a subsistence economy. So constantly having to find money to buy kerosene caused a lot of tension in amongst family units. So it made it easier to not have to continuously buy kerosene as well. So again, we saw the power of the energy cultures framework to try and look at the different elements that come together in order to bring about a rapid transformation and an energy shift. I'm now using the energy cultures framework in a slightly different way to look at climate cultures in the construction industry. This is a project funded by BRANZ, the Building Research Association New Zealand, and I've been working with Andrea Foley and Casimir McGregor on this. And again, using the energy cultures framework to start to understand readiness for climate change in the construction industry. Readiness as a concept in an organisation has not often been studied around complex issues. It's often studied around readiness for organisational change as a restructure, but not necessarily around an organisation getting ready for climate change. So the energy cultures framework helps to talk and pull apart those different elements that we see across organisations starting to embed climate change in their organisation. What is quite interesting about this, and I was kind of a little annoyed about it at the time, but I'm kind of getting over it now, is that it seemed to be the key leverage point to bring about change was in the values and the way that people were thinking. But actually that's quite an important finding, because the way we think is actually starting to bring about the change into how we actually change our practices and change our material culture and bring about that readiness for climate change. So it does indicate that we actually need to strongly think about how we create those mindsets and ways of shifting people's thinking in this area. And that leads me to climate change. And perhaps one of the key focuses of my current research process. And it's been a great experience to co-lead and develop Hei Kaupapa Hononā with Associate Professor Inga Smith, having been involved in its previous form, OCNET, and I think Colin is here as well, somewhere, I can't see him right now, where we called ourselves in those early days the Zealots. But it was an amazing network of people across, and it still is an amazing network, and I can see many of you here across the university, and that interdisciplinary of this incredibly complex issue is one of the things that I've really valued from being a member of this network. In Aotearoa we have 2 targets, or nationally determined contributions. One of these is in 2030, and that's less than 6 years away, so it's not very long for us to meet the target. Our single biggest emitters are businesses. If they reduce their emissions and become climate aligned, a significant decarbonisation transition can occur. But the issue is, how do we know if they're actually reducing, setting appropriate targets, and have integrity in this decarbonisation process? And this brings me to the work last year that was published in Stuff that I worked with Eloise Gibson and Rebecca Mills and a couple of other judges to evaluate what our companies are saying and doing around their carbon emissions. We used and we developed a framework based upon international best practice that looks at impact, transparency and alignment of what organisations were saying, and then we evaluated about 13 different organisations. This was really well received by business. I did wonder that we might have quite a bit of backlash at the time, and got prepared to turn my emails off, but we actually had the opposite. We had companies saying, we want to be part of your evaluation in the future. Even though many of these weren't particularly all looking very green in this report. Right now, Andrea and I have been analysing to do the next round, and I've been looking at developing what I'm calling the Climate Action Tracker Aotearoa that I want to release shortly, which will start evaluating on an annual basis what our companies are saying or doing. This is just an example from the Net Zero website that we're using to base, again, a similar thing. We'll base ours on this with a traffic light kind of system and a bit of a blurb about each organisation. And we've submitted an MB application to try and see if we can get some funding to do that. We really want to do two things with this. One is to help companies, and the other is really to hold companies to account for what they're saying and doing around their emissions. In a similar vein, I'm also working on a project led by Dr. Sebastian Guerrica, who I think is here somewhere. I saw him before. Hi, Seb. And we're focusing on the newly mandated climate risk disclosures. And at the end of last year, we interviewed 20 companies to understand how they're making sense of climate risk in relation to their organisational practices. Those of you who know my research analysis process know that it's very qualitative and it's full of lots of spider diagrams. So I thought, well, I may as well just put that up there because that's how I operate. But this model, this diagram here is my very early qualitative analysis, and you can see the word risk as being incredibly central there, and there's more results to come in that area. But as well as researching what's happening in the reporting space, I'm part of a group looking at more nature-based solutions with Janice Lord and Victoria Kahui, and we've had a wonderful summer student where we've been looking at what a possible biodiversity credit scheme would look like in an agricultural setting. This is based upon our previous research where we interviewed farmers, and we saw considerable potential there for the agricultural sector to take advantage of biodiversity that is often currently perceived as not having great value on a productive farm. So biodiversity credits will offer an avenue for the agricultural sector to develop rent from good farming practice that we saw coming through in our Good Farmer article, and of course will form nature-based solutions for climate change. It's also another way to start to resolve some of those issues mentioned and coming through in my PhD across conservation and preservation conflicts. And finally, nearly there, boys. I just want to finish with us pondering the future. Much of sustainability and climate change is future-oriented, yet most of our current systems operate on very short-term orientation. We need to create future imaginaries that encourage us to think about plausible futures so we can plan now to work towards them. And again, these future imaginaries help people think about what the world might be like and shift the way that people think, going back to our energy cultures framework. So it probably all sounds a little idealistic, but we really do need to walk backwards into the future. And together with Paula O'Kane and Diane Rufew, we've been developing scenarios, and we did our best to really share those in the public domain to initiate conversations on what the future might hold. COVID also offered us the opportunity to think about more flexible working practices, working from home, and thinking about more outcomes-based opportunities for workers. And of course, also the opportunity to have a bit of a reset, but I actually won't say anything more about that, and develop a more resilient society. And this is really important to me because it's all too easy with the work that I do around climate change in particular to get in a doom and gloom mindset in these particular topics. But I remain optimistic. I think that human beings, we're quite clever and we can do things. I think we can create a better world. Obviously it might be uncomfortable getting there, but we have to for our tamariki and theirs. Ngā mihi nui, thank you.
Tēnā rā tātou. Whakarongo ki te au o te moana. The ocean put salt in our veins. The ocean brought us together to find each other in Aotearoa, New Zealand. For Māori, pounamu is a symbol of cultural identity and a valued possession, signifying mana, prestige and authority, as longevity makes it an ideal medium for crafting oha tupuna, so treasured ancestral things, kia ora, to be handed down through the generations. Pounamu is also prized as a gift for sealing bonds, friendship, kinship, gratitude and peace. Mere pounamu, greenstone weapons, were originally used in hand-to-hand combat, and they were also symbols of mana, authority, status, cultural identity, and important relationships.
Kia ora. As Sara is recognised here today as a professor, a mark of honour from the institution in which she have worked so tirelessly for, it is only right that we give her this tohu of appreciation and respect from some of those you have guided. For decades, she has dedicated her work to serving and fighting on behalf of the whenua, those who have gone before her and those that will come after. Sara's fierce advocacy for the environment and those that she works for and with is direct, unrelenting and impactful.
Sara actively works to uplift the voices of tangata whenua, rangatahi, wahine and tauira alike. Not only has Sara spent her career educating others, but she continues to seek development and growth herself. Sara shows deep empathy and fervent passion in her leadership of others and serves as a pillar of support for those around her. We hope that this taonga serves you and your whānau as a tangible reminder of the significant impact that you have had and will continue to have on others. We hope this taonga will give you strength, courage and certainty that you can face anything that's yet to come. Ngā mihi. If anyone else wants to add anything, it's all about transferring of our mauri, our good intention, to this taonga so that Sara can draw on that later. So if anybody else has anything to add, you're welcome to. I know, it's stressful. That's okay. You can share it with her later. Oh, yeah.
Kia ora, Professor Walton. It's been a long time coming, and sorry. Just like to say, I know your father would love to be in here, Martin. Christine, thanks for tuning in from the UK, and David as well. We're a small family, and we're extremely proud of you. Thank you.
Congratulations. You didn't tell me you were doing this. Thank you. So proud of you. Thank you. Oh my goodness.
Christmas. Thank you. I'm glad you got the haircut.
Called up.
Oh, you
That's what my
heard that,
grandma
didn't you?
said.
I forgot I had the mic on. I had to make light. Ngā mihi nui, thank you so much. That is absolutely beautiful. Thank you, Peter, and thank you very much. I am lost for words. Thank you.
Time to sit down.
Too much.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. My name is Hugh Campbell. I think I only had one instruction from Sara, and that was don't upstage me. Yes, that was absolutely amazing, and what a moment. I have just a few words to say to round off this event. Even in challenging times, there are things that happen at universities that are unambiguously good things. Tonight is one of those kinds of occasions. An inaugural professorial lecture is many things. It's a rite of passage, a celebration and a moment of learning. It's a rite of passage for the person involved, and Sara, you'll be very glad to have got this done. It's a celebration for a community, because no successful academic scaled the heights on their own, but it's also a moment of learning. A rare opening of the portal when we see the full scope of what our colleagues have been up to and have a chance to learn from their journey. I'm very honoured to be invited to deliver the response to your lecture tonight, to complete the rite of passage, to celebrate with this community, and to continue learning from this wonderful person. A long time ago, in a year that both of us shall not name, a newly minted lecturer in the Department of Management knocked on my door and asked if I might be available to supervise her PhD. It was Ms. Sara Walton. This was, by the standards of the time, an unusual request. Having a PhD supervisor located somewhere on the wilder fringes of the social sciences wasn't the normal course of action for commerce lecturers over 20 years ago, possibly still isn't. I was keen to take on what would be my first primary supervision of a PhD student. After the first meeting, I concluded she seemed sane, smart, and had already thought about her topic, 3 qualities that are not to be underestimated in a starting PhD student. She wanted to conduct research at the interface of social theory, environmental sustainability transitions, and the politics of going green in a region dominated by traditional extractive industry. I learned a lot from my first PhD student. I learned that it is actually possible to have a full-time lecturing job and nail a PhD while also being a multi-sports athlete and having children. I learned that going into those spaces where new environmental concerns meet old, well-entrenched industries is a tough gig. Those aren't necessarily kind spaces. You need to be tough and a little bit stubborn to push into those spaces. That gleeful photo of her on today's poster is perfect. Those falling coins are clearly a symbolic representation of the share value of West Coast mining and forestry corporations in the early 2000s. When that journey was completed in 2008, I remember sitting on stage at the town hall and watching Sara getting capped and becoming Dr. Walton. The key feeling that I distinctly remember was how proud I was of what she had achieved. I couldn't have finished that PhD in those circumstances. Now she was walking across the stage, still sane, still smart, and now launching into a pile of interesting new research at the interface of critical thinking and actually doing sustainability journeys. Today's talk has shown us just where that journey has taken Sara. She continued her work on sustainability reporting, began to publish on ecopreneurs, and took her ideas into dramatic new locations like Samoa, Vanuatu, and the North Dunedin flatting scene. She wrote on theorising sustainability transitions and became a key node of the emergence of the Energy Cultures Framework and the network of scholars who are refining it in different settings. And of course, she has thrown herself headlong into ways to address the climate crisis. Her scholarship has always been grounded in strong academic insights, but it's also highly applied and directly intended to create actual change in the world. It is also, as she has reminded us today, a scholarly journey that is grounded in optimism. Reflecting on today's talk, I can't escape one important realisation. As Sara's PhD supervisor, I was trained in the late 20th century, when sharp social theoretical critique and finding a nice scholarly angle on obscure academic problems was probably enough to sustain the average academic career. Sara has been the prototype of a 21st century scholar, someone who has from the very beginning understood the seriousness and scale of the environmental and social catastrophes that are looming in front of us. Someone who has been tough, resilient, smart, and incredibly dedicated to making actual change happen. And she is someone who is a phenomenal role model of the kind of 21st century academic we need at this university if we are going to play a meaningful role in how we collectively survive the 21st century. So, for the second time in her career, I've been very happy to sit and watch her take the next upward step on the ladder and receive the recognition she deserves. Once again, I can report how proud I am of what she has achieved. I know that her family, her friends, her colleagues, her students in her university are all proud to see her admitted to the ranks of the full Professoriate. We are proud of how she has done it, and we are excited to see where the journey will go next. So, please join me once again in congratulating Professor Sara Walton.
Thank you, Hugh. Kia ora. I'm going to say a closing karakia, and at the conclusion of the karakia, I'm going to say a karakia for Kai, and we hope that you will all join us across the way at the staff club for the Kai. As with the opening karakia, I'll say it in Māori and I'll say it in English. This is my favourite karakia in the world. Ahi kā ki uta, ahi kā ki tai, kia horohore hia, pora pora, o ahi kā ki roto i te o marama. Let your home fires be seen inland, let your home fires be seen along the coast, and may the sparks from your home fires rise up to be seen throughout the land. Me no tātou. No mai I ngā hua, o te wao, o te ngākina, o te waitai, o te wai Māori, nā tāne, nā rongo, nā tangaroa, nā maru, ko ranganui I tu ihu nei, ko papatuanuku I tākoto nei. Tūturu whakamaua kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora. If you will please join us now at the staff club for a kai to celebrate with Sara and her whānau. Kia ora.